everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty profound and impactful, and that's generational trauma in the Black community.
Yeah.
We're going to be referencing an article called Healing the Past, Addressing Generational Trauma in the Black Community. And this is going to be our roadmap for this exploration.
Sounds good.
So we're going to try to equip you with an understanding of generational trauma, like its historical roots and how it shows up and how we can start healing from it.
Yeah, and we'll be going deeper than just, the definition.
Right.
People think of generational trauma as just like a personal thing.
Right.
It's like a ripple effect, from the past that influences families and communities. And
so it's not just like inheriting your family's love of jazz music. It's
Right.
like inheriting their experiences and their responses to those experiences as well.
Exactly. And, the article highlights epigenetics, which is how trauma can actually alter your genes. So you might inherit from your grandmother not just her beautiful singing voice, but a predisposition to anxiety based on her lived experiences during, say, the civil rights era.
Wow. Okay. So when we talk about generational trauma in the Black community specifically, where do we even begin to trace its roots?
Well, the historical context is super important here. The transatlantic slave trade, with its horrific and inhumane treatment of people, is a fundamental source of this trauma.
Yeah, and to really grasp the magnitude of this, the article describes the transatlantic slave trade as not just a historical event, but a multi-generational assault on the Black psyche.
Right.
And it compares the impact to a wound that never fully heals and is continually being reopened.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
And of course, the trauma didn't just magically disappear with the abolition of slavery.
Okay.
The Jim Crow era, with its institutionalized segregation and discrimination, inflicted new layers of trauma.
Right.
Think about the psychological terror of living under the constant threat of lynching.
Yeah, to your point, the article mentions that during the Jim Crow era, lynchings weren't just acts of violence, but they were calculated acts of terrorism meant to instill fear and subjugation.
Yeah.
And this terror was felt not only by the victims, but by the entire Black community as a shared experience of vulnerability and powerlessness.
Absolutely. And that shared experience is a key component of generational trauma.
Right.
And even today, with the ongoing struggles against police brutality and systemic racism, the trauma continues to echo.
Yeah, and that's a crucial point because I think we often separate historical events from present-day experiences.
Right.
But in the context of generational trauma, they're very much linked.
Yeah.
So how does this trauma actually manifest in people's lives today?
It shows up in a multitude of ways. We see it in mental health issues like heightened anxiety, chronic stress, and even depression.
Yeah, and it's not just internal, right?
Correct.
The article points out that historical trauma can show up in behavioral patterns like aggression and difficulty regulating emotions and impacting social interactions and relationships.
Yes, and it's important to remember that present-day coping mechanisms can also be linked to past traumas.
Okay.
The article discusses how substance abuse, for example, can be a desperate attempt to numb the pain inherited from previous generations.
Oh, wow. It's interesting to think about these patterns in our own families.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever noticed behaviors in your family that might be rooted in something deeper, something perhaps unresolved from the past?
Definitely a question worth pondering. Recognizing these patterns is often the first step toward understanding and addressing generational trauma.
Okay, so in the midst of all of this pain and struggle, the Black community has also demonstrated incredible resilience.
For sure.
So how does cultural identity play a role in healing?
Culture is essential. Think about the traditions passed down through generations.
Right.
Communal gatherings, even just sharing stories around a kitchen table.
Yeah.
These practices create a sense of belonging and shared understanding.
Right. The article really emphasizes the power of those shared experiences in the context of healing. And it talks about how family reunions, for example, are more than just celebrations.
Yeah.
They're opportunities to share stories and to connect with ancestors and to tap into that collective resilience.
Exactly. These cultural practices are vital for preserving history, offering wisdom, and bridging the gap between past and present experiences.
So it's almost like saying, hey, we've been through this together before.
Yeah.
We can get through it again.
Exactly. It's a potent reminder that even in the face of hardship, strength and healing can be found in community-shared identity and those cultural practices.
But while these practices provide a foundation, it's also critical to acknowledge the barriers that exist when it comes to accessing mental health resources.
Absolutely. The article points out the stigma surrounding mental health in the Black community,
Right.
often preventing individuals from seeking help.
Yeah.
It's seen as a sign of weakness,
Right.
and there's often a reluctance to discuss those difficulties openly.
Yeah. And then there's the lack of representation.
Of course.
Right. Feeling comfortable with a therapist who understands your cultural background can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. The article cites a study where 70% of Black men said they wouldn't seek therapy for depression,
Wow.
fearing it make them seem weak. So how can we as a community change this perception?
Yeah.
How do we create safer spaces for Black men to express their vulnerability and seek help without judgment?
Right. And then on top of that, there are the economic barriers that can limit access to care.
Right?
I mean, therapy can be expensive, and many in the Black community face financial obstacles in getting help.
Yes, and the lack of affordable health care disproportionately affects Black communities. Like you're carrying the weight of trauma
Right.
and then facing these obstacles and seeking help.
Right. But the article does offer some hope,
Yeah.
suggesting community mental health initiatives and nonprofit organizations as a starting point for more affordable options.
Yeah, that's right. And it also highlights how technology can help bridge the gap. Online therapy platforms and mental health apps are making resources more affordable and convenient.
Okay, that's good to hear. But let's switch gears for a moment and talk about those stories of resilience and healing.
Sure.
Highlighted in the article, they're so inspiring.
One story that resonated with me was about a woman who used therapy to unpack inherited feelings of inadequacy stemming from her family's history of poverty and racism.
I think that's a powerful reminder that therapy isn't just about addressing immediate problems, but also about unpacking those deeply ingrained beliefs that have been passed down to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's another story about a young man who found solace in community involvement, participating in workshops focused on mental wellness and connecting with others who shared similar backgrounds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And the article describes how this young man initially resisted therapy but found a sense of belonging and shared understanding in these workshops.
Yes.
Which highlights that healing can take many forms. And connecting with others is essential for breaking down that stigma around mental health.
Exactly.
There's also a really moving story about an artist who used painting to process her family's history of trauma.
Wow.
Imagine transforming that pain into creative expression, finding a unique path towards healing through art.
That's incredible.
These stories really showcase the diversity of healing paths and remind us that even in the face of adversity, hope exists.
It does.
Speaking of hope, the article really emphasizes conversations between generations as a crucial aspect of healing.
Right. It's about bridging that gap
Yeah.
and creating space for understanding.
It makes sense, but those conversations can be tough. What advice does the article offer on how to approach such a sensitive topic?
It suggests starting with personal stories
Okay.
because it creates a safe space for vulnerability and encourages others to open up.
So by sharing your own experiences, you're modeling vulnerability,
Yeah.
making it less intimidating for others to do the same.
Exactly. And it creates a foundation for exploring how trauma has impacted family dynamics.
That's a good point. Family patterns can often be traced back to unresolved trauma.
Right.
And these conversations can help us understand the roots of those patterns. What about situations where there's resistance to these conversations? How do you navigate that?
The article emphasizes active listening and empathy above all else. It's not about forcing anyone to talk, but about creating a safe space where they feel heard and understood if they choose to share.
That's a powerful reminder because sometimes just feeling heard and validated can be a huge step towards healing.
Absolutely. And those conversations can often happen organically in familiar settings.
Right.
Think about family gatherings or community events.
Yeah.
Those spaces provide a context for deeper discussions.
Right. It's like weaving those important dialogues into the fabric of everyday life.
Yes.
But while these personal conversations are essential, we also need to address the systemic issues that perpetuate this trauma, right?
Absolutely. The article stresses the importance of advocating for systemic change. And that means targeting the root causes of generational trauma, things like criminal justice reform, educational equity, access to health care.
So it's about dismantling those systems that continue to inflict harm and pushing for a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. Let's start with criminal justice. The article advocates for policies that promote fair treatment and dismantle those punitive practices that disproportionately affect Black communities.
So you're talking about things like over-policing mass incarceration and racial profiling.
Right.
Practices that not only perpetuate trauma, but create a climate of fear and distrust.
We need a fundamental shift from a system focused on punishment to one focused on rehabilitation and community support. And that includes things like community policing, diversion programs, restorative justice initiatives.
So breaking those cycles of harm and creating safer environments that foster trust.
Absolutely.
And speaking of breaking cycles, the article also highlights the need for change in the education system.
Absolutely. We need to address the disparities in educational resources that put Black students at a disadvantage. That means advocating for equitable funding, access to quality teachers, and inclusive curricula.
So it's about leveling the playing field and giving all students, regardless of their background, the opportunity to thrive.
Exactly. And the article stresses the importance of community involvement in educational policies.
Yeah.
It's about ensuring that the voices of those directly impacted by these inequalities are heard and prioritized.
That's a powerful reminder that change often starts at the grassroots level, with communities coming together to demand better for their children. And of course, we can't forget about healthcare.
Absolutely. The article highlights the need for policies that promote affordable health care,
Right.
increased mental health resources, and culturally competent care.
It's about removing those barriers to accessing help and making sure seeking help, especially for mental health, is not hindered by financial constraints or cultural insensitivity.
Exactly. And again, grassroots organizations and civic engagement play a crucial role here. By mobilizing communities to demand systemic reforms, we empower them to become active participants in their own healing journey.
So we've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
from understanding the roots of generational trauma to advocating for systemic change.
Yes.
But what about concrete steps that individuals can take to start their own healing journey?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
The article emphasizes the importance of self-care, things like mindfulness journaling and physical exercise.
Those are like those foundational habits that help us build resilience and navigate the complexities of trauma.
Exactly. And it's crucial to remember that seeking professional help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's about having that safe space to explore your feelings and unpack the impact of generational trauma. Finding a therapist who is culturally competent and understands the nuances of racial trauma is also key.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of community involvement. The article highlights how engaging in community projects and activities can foster a sense of belonging and create a support network. Think about community healing initiatives, cultural awareness programs, even art-based projects.
Right. It's about connecting with others, sharing experiences, and building that network of support.
Exactly, and nurturing those positive intergenerational relationships is crucial.
Okay. So the article talks about how family gatherings, mentorship programs, and storytelling sessions can bridge that generational gap and foster understanding.
It's about sharing wisdom, learning from each other, and creating a legacy of healing for generations to come. We've been talking about, personal journeys and individual actions, but we got to remember that those don't exist in a vacuum. Systemic issues play a huge role in mental health in the Black community.
Right. So it's important to look at the bigger picture, how systems and policies are actually contributing to that cycle of generational trauma.
Exactly. Let's look at housing discrimination. The article points out that the historical and ongoing practice of denying Black families access to safe and affordable housing is a prime example of how systemic racism is keeping that trauma alive across generations.
Yeah, it's not just about where you live, it's about the opportunities tied to location. Safe neighborhoods, access to good schools, even green spaces to enjoy those shouldn't be determined by the color of your skin.
Absolutely. The article states that housing discrimination leads to residential segregation, which concentrates poverty and limits opportunities for upward mobility. It's like a domino effect.
I see the connection. So limited housing choices lead to overcrowded conditions, exposure to environmental hazards like pollution, increased stress, all of which impacts mental and physical health.
Precisely. The article highlights how these stressors combined with the psychological impact of feeling trapped and marginalized contribute to things like anxiety, depression, and even PTSD.
It's a reminder that trauma isn't always about a single event. It can be woven into the fabric of our lives and the environments we're in and the systems we have to navigate every day.
Exactly. And these systemic factors are often made worse by economic disparities. Black families are disproportionately affected by poverty, which creates another layer of challenges.
Right, so you're dealing with the weight of historical trauma, and then you're also facing the daily stress of financial insecurity, limited access to resources, and fewer opportunities for advancement.
The article argues that economic justice is essential for breaking this cycle. We need policies that promote equitable access to employment, quality education, and financial resources. We've got to level the playing field.
So it's not just about individual effort, it's about creating a society where everyone has a fair shot at success. Speaking of education, we touched upon this earlier, but the article really emphasizes culturally responsive education as a way to address generational trauma. Can you talk a bit more about that?
It's about recognizing that students bring their whole selves to the classroom, including their backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. Right.
Culturally responsive education validates their identities and makes them feel like they belong.
So it's not just about teaching facts and figures. It's about creating an environment where Black students feel seen, heard, and respected.
Right. And it goes beyond curriculum. The article talks about teachers who are culturally competent and sensitive to the needs of their Black students. They can create supportive and equitable learning environments.
It's about building trust. When students feel understood and valued, they're more likely to thrive academically and emotionally.
Absolutely. Imagine a classroom where Black history isn't just a single month, but woven into American history throughout the year.
That would be amazing. Black students would see their stories reflected in the curriculum, recognizing the contributions and resilience of their ancestors.
Exactly. That kind of representation can have a huge impact on their self-esteem and mental well-being. It helps to counter those negative narratives around Black history. It's about rewriting the narrative and empowering future generations to embrace their heritage and see their potential. The article also talks about the role of spirituality and faith in healing from generational trauma.
Yes, for many in the Black community, faith has been a source of strength and resilience throughout history. Churches and faith-based organizations have been like pillars of support, providing a sense of community and belonging.
Safe havens, in a way, offering hope and guidance during tough times. But the article points out that the relationship between faith and mental health can be complicated.
It can. There's often a stigma around mental health in faith communities.
Right.
It can be seen as a spiritual failing rather than a legitimate health concern.
Which is a problem because it might prevent people from getting the help they need.
Exactly. It's so important to encourage open and honest conversations about mental health within faith communities. We've got to challenge the stigma and build an environment of understanding and support.
Recognizing that faith and mental well-being can coexist and support each other. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the role of arts and culture in healing. The article talks about how throughout history, art has been a powerful tool for Black communities to express themselves, resist oppression, and build resilience.
Absolutely. Think about the power of music, like spirituals, blues, hip-hop.
Right.
It's been a way to channel pain, share stories, connect with others, and find strength in shared experiences.
You know, the article mentions Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit.
Oh, yeah.
That song, a powerful lament about lynching, wasn't just music. It was a form of collective grieving and resistance. It's an amazing example of how art can be a catalyst for healing and social change.
A great example.
Yeah.
And visual art, literature, dance, all these offer outlets for processing trauma and reclaiming power.
It's about channeling emotions and experiences into something creative, transforming pain into beauty and meaning.
And engaging with art, whether you're creating or just observing, can be incredibly therapeutic. It can help process trauma, reduce stress, foster connection and belonging.
Imagine watching a play that tells stories of resilience and resistance within the Black community, seeing those stories come to life, and feeling that connection to history.
It's powerful. And it's important to support Black artists and institutions. They're vital for preserving history, promoting healing, and inspiring future generations.
It's about investing in those creative spaces where healing happens. Now let's talk about how generational trauma shows up in relationships. We've discussed individual behaviors, but these patterns can affect family and community dynamics too, right?
Absolutely. Trauma can impact how we form attachments, how we set boundaries, how we communicate our needs, and how we deal with conflict.
So these patterns, often unhealthy patterns, can get passed down without us even realizing it?
The article uses a family tree analogy. Imagine a tree struck by lightning. The damage might not be visible right away, but over time, those branches might grow in distorted ways. Trauma can create these invisible cracks in a family's foundation, impacting future generations.
I like that analogy. It shows how trauma's effects can linger even if they're not talked about.
And it's not just about how individuals behave, it's about the roles they play within a family. For example, the article mentions how trauma can show up in parenting styles. Parents who've experienced trauma might struggle to create a safe and nurturing environment for their kids, maybe through overprotection or harsh discipline.
It's like those behaviors become the default.
Right. And those patterns can ripple out, impacting relationships and dynamics across generations.
But the good news is the article suggests these patterns can be broken. With awareness, support, and effort, families can heal and build healthier dynamics.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those unhealthy patterns and choosing to do things differently.
And therapy can be a great tool for families to heal from generational trauma.
It provides that safe space to explore those family dynamics, learn new ways to communicate and address those ingrained patterns. It's It's about rewriting the script for the future.
I love that. Now, as we've been talking about personal experiences and societal structures, it's important to acknowledge the unique challenges of specific groups within the Black community. The article talks about Black men in particular.
Yes, Black men are often navigating a world that both devalues and demonizes them.
Right.
They face racism and sexism, which has a huge impact on their well-being.
We hear a lot about the strong Black man stereotype. Right. But that pressure to always be strong can be really damaging.
It can. It prevents them from being vulnerable and seeking help.
It's like a mask that hides their pain and struggle.
Exactly.
Oh.
And on top of that, Black men are more likely to be victims of violence, to be incarcerated, and to face disparities in healthcare and education.
It's like they're battling these systemic barriers and injustices while feeling like they can't show any weakness.
It's crucial to create spaces where Black men feel safe and supported, to express their emotions and seek help without shame. We have to challenge those stereotypes and build a society that values and uplifts Black men.
Absolutely. The article also talks about the unique challenges that Black women face.
Yes, Black women carry the weight of both racism and sexism, trying to make their way in a world that often ignores their experiences and silences their voices. They're expected to be strong, even in the face of overwhelming adversity, which can lead to suppressing their emotions and not seeking help.
It's like they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, but they're expected to just keep smiling and keep going.
Exactly. The article mentions how Black women are often the caretakers in their families and communities, putting everyone else's needs before their own. It can lead to exhaustion, burnout, and neglecting their own well-being.
And it takes a toll on their mental and emotional health. The article says Black women experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges, but often face barriers to accessing health care, especially mental health care.
And considering the historical mistrust of the medical system within the Black community, it's understandable why seeking help can be so hard.
We need to create spaces where Black women feel safe, supported, and empowered to prioritize their well-being. We have to dismantle those expectations that put so much burden on them.
It's about recognizing their strength, but also acknowledging their humanity and their need for support. And we can't forget about the LGBTQ+ community within the Black community.
Right. The article talks about how this intersection is often overlooked, where individuals are facing multiple layers of oppression. They're dealing with homophobia and transphobia on top of racism and discrimination.
Imagine being rejected by your family or community simply for being who you are, having to navigate spaces that don't fully accept you. It creates a feeling of isolation and internalized shame that can be so damaging.
And then you add historical trauma on top of that.
It's a heavy burden. The article stresses creating affirming and inclusive spaces for Black LGBTQ+ individuals, places where they feel celebrated and supported.
Right, counteracting those messages of rejection with love and acceptance. And on a societal level, we have to advocate for policies that protect their rights and ensure equal opportunities.
Absolutely. Dismantling those systems that cause harm is crucial for creating a world where everyone can thrive regardless of their race, gender identity, or sexual orientation.
And, of course, we need to think about generational trauma's impact on Black children and youth. They're especially vulnerable and face a lot of challenges.
Think about a child exposed to police brutality violence in their community, or the incarceration of someone they love. Those experiences can have a devastating and long-lasting impact on their development.
The article says that Black children are more likely to have anxiety, depression, PTSD, and other mental health issues. And those can show up as problems in school, behavior problems, and social difficulties.
It's complicated. The article emphasizes addressing the systemic issues that contribute to these challenges.
So it's not just about treating individuals. It's about creating a society that values and protects Black children. We have to tackle things like poverty, racism, and lack of access to good education and health care.
We need to create a world where Black children feel safe, supported, and empowered.
Right.
Now, the article also discusses the role of mental health professionals in addressing generational trauma. It talks about the need for culturally competent therapists who understand what Black individuals and families are going through.
They need to go beyond the textbook definitions and understand the lived experiences of their clients.
Right. They need to be sensitive to cultural nuances, beliefs, and practices, and avoid imposing their own biases.
The article also talks about the importance of building trust, which is hard considering the historical mistrust of the healthcare system in the Black community.
Creating a space where Black clients feel safe sharing their experiences is so important for treatment to be effective.
And it's not just about providing therapy. It's about understanding the big picture and advocating for change.
Absolutely. Therapists need to be advocates for their Black clients, helping them navigate systems and access resources.
Healing from generational trauma requires a multifaceted approach. It's not just about therapy, it's about addressing those bigger issues too.
That's why community-based services are so vital. They're often more accessible and relevant, providing support within the community.
Like community mental health centers, faith-based groups, and grassroots organizations.
Right, they're embedded in the community and understand the specific needs and challenges.
They offer therapy support groups and case management, and they can connect people to other resources like housing assistance, job training, and education.
It's a holistic approach, recognizing that healing involves more than just addressing symptoms. It's about the whole person.
Exactly. These community services help reduce stigma, increase access to care, and promote healing within the Black community. Now, as we keep exploring generational trauma, it's helpful to define some key concepts. The article talks about historical trauma.
Historical trauma is the collective emotional and psychological wounding that happens over time and across generations.
Okay.
It starts with massive group trauma experiences. It's not just about individuals. It's about the shared trauma of a whole group of people who've experienced oppression, violence, and marginalization.
So for the Black community, that would be the transatlantic slave trade, slavery, Jim Crow, and the systemic racism that continues today.
It's the weight of history carried by generations of Black people. It's not just in the past. It's still impacting lives.
It affects how we see the world, how we act, and our relationships with ourselves and others.
To address historical trauma, we need to acknowledge the past, promote healing, and fight for social justice, remembering and honoring our ancestors while working towards a better future.
That's powerful. The article also differentiates between historical trauma and racial trauma. What's the difference?
Racial trauma is specifically about the trauma that people of color experience due to racism and discrimination.
Okay.
It's the emotional and psychological damage from repeated exposure to racism. It can include obvious acts of aggression or those smaller things like microaggressions and systemic bias that wear you down over time.
It's not just one incident, it's the constant experience of living in a society where your race is devalued or used against you.
Exactly. The article says racial trauma can show up as anxiety, depression, PTSD, and even physical health problems.
It impacts your sense of safety, belonging, and even your identity.
It's a deeply personal experience with far-reaching consequences. The article says that racial trauma isn't just a personal issue. It's a public health crisis that needs systemic solutions.
So we need to go beyond individual therapy and dismantle the systems that perpetuate racism and discrimination.
We need to promote racial equity justice and healing for those affected by racial trauma. Now, shifting focus a bit, the article also addresses the challenges faced by Black immigrants and refugees. They often arrive carrying trauma from their home countries and then have to adjust to a new culture and system.
It's like they're dealing with multiple layers of stress. They might have experienced war, persecution, or violence in their home countries, and then come here hoping for a better life, only to be met with racism, discrimination, and language barriers.
It creates a complex web of trauma. The article says that the trauma experienced by Black immigrants and refugees can impact their families and communities across generations.
Right. It can make things like parenting, communication, and family dynamics really difficult. And it can lead to a sense of isolation and mistrust, making it even harder to access support.
We need to be aware of these unique challenges and create welcoming and supportive environments. We need to offer culturally sensitive services that address their specific needs.
And on a larger scale, we need to advocate for policies that protect their rights and ensure they have equal opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about intergenerational patterns, which are key to understanding generational trauma.
The article describes them as behaviors, beliefs, and experiences that are passed down from one generation to the next. Like an inheritance, but not always a physical thing.
Right. They can be positive things like cultural traditions and family values, but also negative, like unhealthy coping mechanisms or ways of relating to others.
And with trauma, these patterns can keep cycles of dysfunction and harm going.
The article gives the example of kids who grow up seeing domestic violence.
Right.
They may be more likely to experience or perpetuate violence in their own relationships later in life. It's not guaranteed, but it shapes how they understand relationships.
Breaking free from those ingrained patterns is hard.
It is. It's the same with coping. If you learn to numb your feelings with substances or avoid conflict, you're more likely to keep doing that even if it's harmful.
So we need to understand these patterns to break the cycle.
It's about recognizing those patterns and making a conscious decision to change. Therapy, education, and community support can help with that.
Becoming aware, challenging those patterns, and learning new, healthier ways of relating to ourselves and others. Now let's talk about resilience in the face of all this. Black communities have shown incredible strength.
They have. The article defines resilience as the ability to bounce back from adversity, to adapt and thrive despite tough situations.
And it's not about ignoring the pain. It's about coping, healing, and growing.
Finding the strength to keep going. The article points out that Black resilience is rooted in cultural traditions, community support, faith, and spirituality.
Finding strength in shared history, celebrating accomplishments, and drawing inspiration from those who came before us.
And building individual and collective strategies for coping with stress, managing emotions, and finding support.
The article also talks about post-traumatic growth,
Right.
which means people can actually experience positive changes as a result of trauma.
It doesn't diminish the pain, but it highlights the potential for growth and transformation.
So it's more than survival. It's about finding meaning and purpose in the aftermath.
People who experience post-traumatic growth may develop a stronger appreciation for life, stronger relationships, a new sense of purpose, and a deeper spiritual connection.
Like finding the silver lining.
The article emphasizes that post-traumatic growth isn't about denying the pain. It's about acknowledging that healing and growth are possible even after adversity.
It's a hopeful message. As we wrap up this part, let's talk about self-care. It's essential for everyone, but especially for those dealing with generational trauma.
Taking care of ourselves is essential. It allows us to be there for ourselves and for others.
The article lists some self-care practices like mindfulness meditation, spending time in nature, creative activities, journaling.
Find what nourishes you.
Make time for yourself. And of course, seeking professional help is crucial.
Therapy can be a powerful tool for processing trauma, developing coping skills, and becoming more resilient.
The article says healing is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, patience, compassion, and a commitment to both personal and collective transformation.
And it's okay to ask for help. You're not alone.
Surround yourself with supportive people.
The article also highlights cultural healing practices for addressing generational trauma. These are rooted in traditions and beliefs passed down through generations, providing a sense of connection, meaning, and purpose.
Things like storytelling, music, dance, rituals, and spiritual practices.
Exactly. They help us connect with our heritage and tap into collective wisdom.
And they can be powerful for healing. The article mentions drumming and singing, which have been used for centuries in African and African American cultures to release emotions, heal, and build community.
It's about recognizing the power of these traditions to connect us to our ancestors, our culture, and our inner strength.
And storytelling.
Yeah.
Sharing stories helps us process, make sense of the past, and offer guidance to future generations.
It's like weaving together a tapestry of shared experiences connecting us to the past and the future.
And these practices provide a holistic approach to healing, recognizing the mind, body, spirit, and community.
Now let's talk about activism and social justice.
Right.
We need to address the systems that contribute to trauma if we want to create lasting change.
It's not just about individual healing. It's about those larger forces that cause harm.
Activism can be many things. It can be advocating for policy changes, protesting, or supporting organizations fighting oppression.
Using your voice and actions to make a more just and equitable world.
Healing from trauma isn't just a personal responsibility. It's a collective effort that requires systemic change.
Working together to create a world where everyone can thrive regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status.
Now let's talk about intergenerational healing, which means recognizing that trauma affects multiple generations and healing requires a collective approach.
It's about seeing how past trauma shapes the present and working together to stop those cycles of harm.
Intergenerational healing can involve things like sharing stories, listening to elders, participating in rituals, and engaging in community activism.
Building connections between generations, fostering understanding, and creating a legacy of healing.
We all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
As we approach the final part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with some takeaways and action steps from the article.
First, acknowledge that generational trauma is real and it matters.
It's a real issue that continues to affect Black individuals, families, and communities.
Second, create spaces for healing individually and collectively.
Healing can be many things: therapy support groups, cultural practices, or connecting with community services.
Third, we have to address the root causes: racism, discrimination, poverty, and lack of access to resources.
We can't just focus on individual healing. We need to push for policy changes, support organizations fighting for social justice, and speak up for systemic change.
Fourth, we need to find ways to cope with the challenges of living in a world that's often hostile and unjust.
Prioritize self-care, connect with supportive communities, find meaning and purpose, and celebrate accomplishments.
Fifth, remember that healing takes time.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Be patient with yourself, be compassionate, and commit to personal and collective transformation.
And lastly, remember that there is hope.
Hope that things can get better, that we can heal, and that we can build a more just world for ourselves and future generations.
That hope isn't naive. It's what drives our resilience and our commitment to change. So we've really explored a lot in this deep dive on generational trauma in the Black community. We've looked at the history and how it shows up today and its effects on different groups and how important it is to heal both individually and systemically.
It has been a really in-depth conversation, and as we start wrapping up, I think it's important to talk about what people can actually do. Where can they turn to for support on their healing journey?
That's a great point. I think the first step, like the article mentions, is acknowledging you need support and reaching out. There are a lot of different paths, and it depends on the person and what feels right.
Therapy can be a great place to start.
Mhm.
A good therapist can provide that space where you feel safe and you can, unpack those experiences and work on coping strategies and start healing.
And the article really stresses finding a therapist who not only specializes in trauma, but is also culturally competent. Someone who understands the unique experiences of Black individuals and families.
Yeah, it's about finding someone who really sees you and gets it. Someone who understands what you're going through and can guide you.
And it doesn't have to be just therapy. Support groups can be really helpful too. I mean, there are groups online and in person where you can connect with people who get it because they've been through similar things.
That's so powerful. Realizing you're not alone and that others understand can make a huge difference.
The article talks about how support groups can create a sense of community and validation and encouragement. It reminds you that you're not alone in this.
And there are also these fantastic community-based organizations doing such incredible work. I mean, these groups like community mental health centers, faith-based organizations, grassroots initiatives, they offer so many services from counseling to advocacy to case management.
And the great thing about them, like the article says, is they're right there in the community. They understand the specific needs and challenges that Black individuals and families are facing.
Yeah, they're not just offering a one-size-fits-all approach. They're meeting people where they are and providing support that makes sense for them.
And we can't forget about all the self-help resources that are out there. I mean, there are books and articles, podcasts, online courses that can be really helpful.
Well, for sure. But the article does say to be careful when choosing self-help resources. Make sure they're credible, evidence-based, and fit with your values.
It's about finding those resources that resonate with you and help you feel empowered. And it's important to remember that healing isn't always a straight line.
Right.
There will be setbacks and times when things feel overwhelming and you might need to reach out for extra support.
And that's totally okay. The key is to keep going, even if it's just baby steps towards healing and wholeness.
Yeah.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
We've talked about getting support in general, but the article also mentions some specific organizations doing great work on generational trauma in the Black community.
Right.
One is the Association of Black Psychologists. They can help you find culturally competent therapists and learn more about mental health issues in Black communities.
That's a great resource. And there's Therapy for Black Girls. It's an online platform that connects Black women and girls with therapists, support groups, and other resources.
It's a fantastic initiative focusing on accessible and relevant mental health support.
And of course, there's the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, founded by Taraji P. Henson. They're working to destigmatize mental health in the Black community.
It's inspiring to see people using their platform to advocate for mental health and access to care. And the article also mentions NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Right. NAMI is a great resource. They have chapters all over the country.
And there are so many other amazing organizations doing great work locally. The article suggests just searching online for mental health resources for Black people in your area.
It's amazing to see all these people dedicated to helping the Black community heal.
It reminds us that while the challenges are real, there's help out there, and we don't have to go through it alone.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you feeling hopeful. Generational trauma is a big and complex issue, but it's not impossible to overcome.
By understanding where it comes from, recognizing its effects, and taking action to heal, we can break those cycles of harm and create a better future.
That's what we've been talking about, giving you knowledge, a framework for understanding, and inspiring you to take action.
Healing is possible. We can be resilient. And we have the power to change things. Thank you for being with us on this journey. We hope you found it helpful and empowering.